Hello, this is the Fiction Nonfiction Podcast from Literary Hub, where we believe that every issue in your Twitter feed or on the evening news has already been tackled somewhere in literature. I'm V.V. Ganeshananthan, also known as Sugi, author of the novel Love Marriage.
And I'm Whitney Terrell, author of the novel The Good Lieutenant.
So first, I want to cite all of the real caveats, many of which we've covered on this show. The pandemic isn't good for anybody, and it's been beyond awful or straight out deadly for millions of people, and there are no silver linings. But still, people go to work, they serve food, they teach, they adopt pandemic puppies. I don't know, mine for Bitcoin.
Oh my God, wait a minute. Are we going to do an episode about my Bitcoin?
No, we're not doing an episode about your Bitcoin.
Wait a second. The last episode we did was about the Biden boom. We talked about economics. And I thought like the perfect thing for us to do would be to talk about buying Bitcoin.
I don't actually believe that you own Bitcoin, but you are on track about this episode because we decided to follow up on our macroeconomics discussion in our last episode with a more specific and on-brand discussion of how the Great Reopening will affect authors and the publishing industry in general.
So we're going to talk about my Tesla.
God, I might as well just do this whole show by myself. In the second half of the show, we'll talk to novelist Monica West about her new book, Revival Season, and what it's like to launch a book right now.
Can we talk about my GameStop stock?
But first, we're going to talk to Whitney's long-suffering editor, Sean McDonald. Sean is the founder and publisher of the imprint MCD at FSG. He's been an editor at Farrar, Straus and Giroux since 2011. He's the co-founder and publisher of FSG Originals, FSG's noted line of paperback and digital originals. He previously worked as an executive editor and online creative director at Riverhead, as an editor at Nantalese Doubleday, and at Arcade Publishing. He has worked with such writers as Sloane Crosley, John Darnielle, Junot Diaz, Nicola Griffith, Marlon James, George Saunders, Tamara Shopson, Robin Sloan, Hector Tobar, Ellen Ullman, Jeff Vandermeer, and God save him, Whitney Terrell.
Wait a minute. You invited my editor to be on the show?
Why wouldn't I invite your editor to be on the show? He's perfect to talk about this stuff. I thought you'd be happy.
I'm not done with the book.
Okay, but you're going to be.
No, I'm not ready to talk right now. I can't do it right now.
Hey, Sean, Whitney's not done with his book.
Quiet.
Well, Sean, welcome to the show. I've heard a lot about you. It's such a delight to have you with us.
It's exciting to be here.
Thank you very much for being here. To quote Gilda Radner, which nobody may even know who that is anymore, it's always something. And that the world never says to publishers, we have nothing going on and all we want to do is pay attention to your books. But there are degrees, right? So when we published The Good Lieutenant together, Trump was the story, but I personally felt lucky, compared to 2001 when I published my first novel right before 9/11. In your years in publishing, where does COVID rank in terms of disruptive events in publishing books?
In terms of disruption, I mean, I can't really think of anything more. I mean, at least the last year overall. I mean, we've just been through so much. I mean, COVID itself obviously has been insane on its own, and the shutdown and all that. But then the murder of George Floyd, protests.
I mean, the Trump presidency itself, all of these things were such gigantic stories. I mean, we are focusing on COVID here, but yeah, any of those stories would have dominated any news cycle.
Yeah, so I mean, we knew we were coming into an election last year, but we didn't know anything that was going to be surrounding it. But yeah, I mean, just the whole shutdown has been, just on a personal level, like more disruptive than anything I can think of. 9/11 was obviously hugely disruptive, but not in the same way at all, and was maybe more intense in the moment, but also. Yeah, in terms of disruption, I can't think of anything that would top this.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny to even think about the word disruption. Like, at what point it's not even a disruption anymore. It's just like an altered state of normal that we have to plan for. And so I think I was really curious to talk to you about the practicalities of publishing under these very strange conditions, this uncharted territory. And based on what Whitney has told me about you as an editor, I'm assuming you approach the books you published during this strange time with the same heart and excitement and conviction as usual, but it's like a whole different toolbox probably that you had to use. I'd love to hear you talk about how you had to change stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, as we were sort of just saying, everything feels different. I think, the biggest thing for me has been the difference, and I guess the utter inability to really imagine what it's like on the other end of the screen or whatever it is for everyone else, just because lives have become so different, and you just don't know what it is that's going on outside, your viewfinder. And I think you just feel much more sensitive to it. It feels weird to be, approaching anyone with trying to convince them to read something or to write about something. It often feels inappropriate. And as we've tried to get closer to what everyone keeps calling a new normal, I think we've gotten more used to having those conversations, but that context is just, so radically different that it's it's hard. Everything feels harder that way. You have to push through so much that you don't know. And I think when we were all in offices, and there was just kind of some assumptions about what everyone's days were like and what they were focusing on and able to focus on, and that just doesn't feel like the case at the moment. And yeah, clearly all the tools are different, from those basic things like knowing where to send things to people, how to reach them, when to reach them, what to expect from when you're going to be able to get something done, when someone else is going to get something done. It all feels completely jumbled from where we were a year ago.
How to get the sound for a podcast to work, which we were struggling with just about 2 minutes ago.
Yeah,
I mean, you don't have that problem if you're in the same room.
This is true. We were all experts at that 14 months ago, and now it's anyone's game.
So I'm really curious about calendars. Did you, this thing hit and you're sort of like, I don't know how long this is going to last. Did you go back and Jenga your publishing schedule around? Did books get actually moved, or did you have to allot more time for stuff? How did time work? Time is, my friend Lacey Johnson says, time is a soup.
Yeah, soup works. It's but anyway, lots of things got moved. I mean, one of the biggest things that happened for us was the printers all got hit by COVID, sort of at least as hard as anyone else in the industry, and so they were working with diminished staffs, and they were trying to do social distancing, so they had fewer people there, and so printing schedules fell way behind. So we had to sort of shift everything based on when we could expect printings to come in. They're still not back to what was normal, and so that's definitely changed a lot of the way we figure out not so much when to publish, but how much to print and what to expect from each publication. And it's changed the way we have to think about the way things are going to work, just because the turnaround times are different. That was a huge disruption in the way we publish. It was, never before have we just shifted books wholesale, trying to, predict when things were going to be normal again, predict when we were going to be able to get books, all those things that we, some of which we did an okay job at, some of which we didn't. But the big thing was just moving things by months or often longer.
I would also think like your sales staffs, right? Like everyone, I mean, I don't know if I'm using the right terms, but every publishing house has like regional people who like go out to bookstores and figure out what the demand for a book might be. And can they even do that during a period like this? I mean, is that process all completely disrupted?
Oh yeah, entirely. I mean, I don't think they're doing physical sales calls at all at the moment.
Right.
They're certainly not,
But they used to go to a bookstore and talk to people about stuff, right? Yeah. I mean, that was
absolutely.
the business. Okay.
So yeah, that's all, obviously they all have those relationships still, and they're still in communication. But like everything else, they're changing the way that they do things, and changing the way all those things happen. And still stores are still just starting to reopen. I don't think we have any sense really of, a uniform new normal for how retail is working. It's all regional, and then often store by store, and certain stores desperate to open, probably other stores hesitant to reopen, for all kinds of reasons. So So yeah, that's also disrupted.
So we caveated this at the beginning of the show, but I'll re-caveat that many more important things happened bad in the world during COVID than things that happened in the publishing industry to us in our world, right? That it was a terrible, terrible pandemic, but our show is at least partly about this industry. You can't really complain about a book launch being disrupted while millions of people are dying from a dread disease across the globe, but one can feel, if you're an author, private grief and uncertainty, for a lot of work, sort of being put in doubt, and that was how I felt after publishing the novel that I published, right before 9/11. And I talked to my editor at the time, it was not you, it was Ray Roberts, about how that event changed or didn't change things for the book. Did you have conversations like that with authors, and what were those like?
Yeah, I mean, those have been ongoing conversations, and they've evolved as the situation has evolved. Obviously, at first we really did think we were gonna be back in a couple of weeks, and it was just going to be a serious but brief disruption. But those, it feels silly now, but those were heartbreaking moments of canceling a few stops of a book tour, or like trying to reconfigure some things on the fly. And yeah, so every author I've published, I think we've had some long conversations or short conversations over many calls or emails about the situation and what to expect and what we can't expect. It's this crazy thing where we're all in it together, but what we're in together is being isolated. And so it's hard to convey a sense of collective expectation, I guess. But I think everyone understands, that this is a crazy time to be publishing a book. It's a crazy time to be trying to communicate to lots of people. And so everyone understands that there's even more of a kind of lottery quality to it, which is heartbreaking because yes, there are horrible things going on. At the same time, people have spent years and years of their lives on these books, and it's hard to be putting them out there without the confidence of knowing what's going to work and what's not going to work. And so,
does it take an emotional toll on you? You're not a person who front and centers what Sean is feeling, because I think that you, as an editor, try to think about what your authors are feeling, and so you would never say like, boy, this has been really hard to me, because you'd be talking to me about something that I was having a hard time with, right? But surely it's got to be difficult, draining, maybe.
It's been a really hard, draining year. Like, how much of that is about the difficulties of publishing, I don't know. But yeah, it's been a draining year. But I don't think that I don't feel like I've been especially suffering based on the way things are. In lots of ways, I feel like I've been really lucky. But I think that, but I think that it's, well, as you're saying, it's really a hard time for everyone. So it's hard to privilege, anyone's sense of difficulty.
Is there a decision that you made this year that was one that really surprised you? I don't know. I mean, I think Whitney and I did an episode on this pandemic fairly early on. We had Richard Preston on and Lori China, a reporter with the South China Morning Post. And so I think, I don't know, I at least had this, I don't know that I had a sense of what was coming, but I had like I had an intense sense of that something that was going to last for a long time was going to be really bad.
This was in February of 2020.
It was actually Whitney, it was January.
And he said on the podcast, he said, I don't know if the streets of New York will be empty like Wuhan, but I think probably so.
And I think that, right, I mean, one of the things that has been so exhausting has been the uncertainty. And so you're not only making a new decision when you've already, you maybe have something, right? You maybe have a book schedule that you thought is settled. I planned this whole thing and now I've got to redo it. And I have to redo it within the parameters of this uncertainty. And, so then there's also the fear that you might have to do it again and again and again. And I wonder, is there a decision that you look back on that you feel like characterizes this period for you or surprised you in some way?
I haven't thought about that. And in terms of specific decisions, it does feel like it's been a lot of triage, I guess. And I mean, I think of sort of everyone in this period is simply surviving. And so I think of, a lot of the things we've done has been, making decisions based on surviving. I mean, for me, the first thing was leaving the city, which is a place I've lived for my entire adult life. And that's, and I'll be back as soon as I can. But, no, I don't really, I don't have a big decision that I made somewhere in the middle of this, because it really has been a kind of day by day, let's get through this, let's figure it out, let's, let's try to, try a different thing or try another thing based on what is or isn't working.
Well, I mean, you're an extremely inventive publisher, and we're going to get to that in a minute, but I also want to talk about, Sugi and I are focusing on the author-editor relationship. I don't know why. There must be some unique interest there for us. But I want to talk about the editor-editor relationship, or the editor-art director relationship, and the editor-publicist relationship. I've been in quite a number of publishing houses, including at Farrar, Straus and Giroux, and there's a lot of community there. There are things that Ray used to always talk about, the hot titles meeting. I don't know if that was just a Viking thing, or if that everyone has a hot titles meeting, or, when somebody buys a book, you don't have to do that because you have your own imprint now, but you used to, sometimes you got to meet with the whole editorial staff and pitch the book, and everyone has to talk about it, right? And these things are all happening. And there's, people are talking in the hallways, all this stuff. And now you've been working remotely. I mean, how much is lost through that? Or maybe it's better. I don't know. I mean, I have no idea. I just know it's different,
I mean, there are certainly a few things that work better, and, hopefully we'll learn from those and figure out how to incorporate them in whatever the new normal happens to look like. But yeah, I mean, the thing you mentioned about the talking in the hallways is the biggest difference, is that everything's an appointment. There's not the sense of, grabbing someone just because, you're worried about something, or you're excited about something, or you have an idea or they have an idea. And yeah, just that sort of organic sense of being in the project together. You can recreate that a little bit in a Zoom call, but even so, you're prescribed to your 45 minutes or 60 minutes or half an hour. And, and so everyone's saving up things for each conversation and running through agendas. And, that's just, it's certainly not the way my conversations used to work. And I miss that a lot. And it's, and I don't know what it will be like going forward. Like when will that come back, and how we'll achieve it? I think we will in some way. And I think we're getting better at it remotely, but it's certainly, a thing that's been missing is just that, the sort of sense of casual and easy collaboration. Everything now is you have to strategize how you're going to map out your time with people, and it's just a very different sensation than what you were talking about, the way the office used to feel.
And then in addition to kind of the water cooler or hallway chatter or spontaneous conversations that we're alluding to here, there's also just sort of the purely social elements of publishing, the famed publishers' lunches or big fancy book launch parties or taking writers out to drinks. And I don't know, I mean, I don't know whether all of that stuff is coming back or not. It was interesting to me to see, award ceremonies where writers were dressing up in their cocktail gear to Zoom from home. I appreciate sort of the spirit of that. I don't know that we're returning to the in-person version of it. What do you think?
I think some of it will be back. Absolutely. Obviously, I hope lunch comes back. I mean, on the list of things about the city that I miss, not cooking is one of them. Like it's, so I'm, I'm eager for lots of that to come back, I think. But
where's the first place you'll go for lunch when you go back and you can have your first lunch from your office?
I honestly can't even answer that because everything's different now. It's there are restaurants that are gone. There are restaurants that are different. It's a strange thing to go back to the city now. I'm about 2 hours away from the city now, so we do get back in, but every trip it feels like something's shifted subtly, and the places I would go to regularly are either gone or they're just sort of different versions of themselves, and yeah, that's kind of part of what I was alluding to earlier, is that for better and definitely for worse, publishing is such a New York City-based business, and there was this sense of commonality in that, and that feels certainly, at the very least, diluted right now. And I don't know, and like I said, for better and worse, there are lots of reasons why that's problematic, and it would be great if we can figure out ways to enlarge the world that is publishing, but also keep that sense of intense collaboration. And
we weren't planning on talking about this, but it's so interesting to hear you talk about New York. And I don't think I've talked to anyone about the city itself. I feel like New York has been changed more than Kansas City, where I live. I mean, most of the restaurants that I would hang out are still around. I mean, some have closed, but I could name to you like, oh, I'll go to this place or this place now that I've been vaccinated, So I guess like, I'm not going to ask you to describe New York now, but I'm sorry to hear that, like, it seems like it's going to be a really different city when you go back.
yes, I mean, there's no question that it will be different. Our offices are in the financial district, which obviously feel a lot different right now. I believe in the city. I believe the city will be back. I believe it will be a different city, and there's a lot that will be lost that I'm sure I'll miss, and that will be heartbreaking. But it will also be back, and there will be different restaurants, but there'll be good restaurants.
So, Sean, as we are moving towards a kind of tentative reopening, but it seems like a definitive reopening, you've got some optimism in that answer there too. And I wonder if you learned anything useful about publishing books during this past period of lockdown that will stay with you. For instance, the in-person book tour with the flight schedule that you alluded to before, and the plane tickets and the hotel reservations. That was, I think, for a lot of people already dying for a lot of reasons before the pandemic. And I wonder if those are done or whether you're going to start planning them again.
I've been honestly a little surprised at how vehemently many people have wanted those back, because as you were saying, that it did feel like that was something that was sort of clearly fading. But I do believe they'll be back in some form. I don't think they'll be back in the way that people imagine them, which was largely in the past. But the 28 city tour with that kind of a flight and a hotel every day is, I think, at least will be very, very limited. But I do think there will be events in bookstores again, and I think, yeah, people have missed them in ways that have surprised them, have surprised me. But I do think, yeah, I think we've learned, the biggest thing we've learned is that we can do it still, that publishing still works, and we can still bring books to people even in the craziest of circumstances. And that's something I don't know that I had thought about that much, but it's something we didn't know. And and we learned that we can change how we do things to try to adapt. Not that we did everything perfectly by any means, and obviously we're continuing to adapt and change and trying to figure things out.
So in a lot of ways, you've had a very experimental career as an editor and publisher. I felt like you were in ways equipped for these kinds of challenges. You founded your own imprint, MCDFG, in May 2016. The stated goal at that time was to, quote, create a space to publish work and experiment with publishing styles, forms, and genres that are at the edges of FSG's traditions. So you are, and you always have been, somebody who's takes those kind of risks. You have you launched the electric eel. That was before the pandemic, but you're still doing that newsletter. I saw in April that you hosted a live reading with Kawhi Strong Washburn, who's been on this show, for the MCDFG Instagram page. What kind of experiments did you try during the pandemic, and which one of those works? Which of them worked best, and do you think you'll keep sticking with?
I did go into this feeling a little bit like, yeah, we were not equipped for it, but half of our team was already remote, and so it seemed like we, maybe should have a leg up and that type of thing, which I think was true. I do think maybe it was a little easier at first, but then I think that also led me to underestimate exactly just how, traumatic and upsetting the whole thing would be for everyone involved. But yeah, in terms of things we did, the thing I was proudest of was this event we did for Maria Devana Headley's translation of Beowulf last fall. We organized this sort of marathon reading of the entire book with a kind of star-studded cast of readers, and it turned out to be this amazing month-long experience that just felt like a special event for the book. The kind of thing that, I don't know, even if we had done it in New York City, it would have been a very limited, I don't know. Yeah, it would have been a very limited experience without the reach that we could have with this. We could bring in different people that we wouldn't have been able to do in person, even in New York City. And yeah, it just felt like this special moment that celebrated this very unexpected, sensation of a publication, and got to bring different voices and different audiences in. And we worked with an independent bookseller who's out here near me, One Grand Books, and they were instrumental entirely to pulling it off. And so yeah, it fostered a sense of collaboration that I think has always been there a bit, but became front and center the way we're always collaborating with different people to make things happen. And yeah, so that was the single event that I was proudest of. And but as I said, a moment ago, like, I think all of us finding that sense that we can figure out how to do this has been, yeah, one of the big lessons of the past year or so.
Well, Sugi has another question, but I just want to mention also that we did have Maria on the show, and she announced that thing was going to happen. So I was excited to see it go. I thought it worked really well.
It was cool. Really awesome. It was very cool to see, the list of people who were reading the book, and the excitement around that was, it reached such a broad and interesting audience, and so and every day people would talk about it, which was just a lot of fun to see.
You can't predict that. You wouldn't have said like, oh, well, there's going to be a pandemic, and the big hit book that I'm going to do is going to be a translation of Beowulf. That's going to work. It's going to be awesome. That's how we do pandemics.
That, like I said, was all completely unexpected, which was great. It was thrilling, of course. And in that event, it was so amazing to watch the energy that all the different readers put into it. And, it really became, each one of the readings was this little special event. And yeah, it was incredible. It was really, it was really wonderful. So yeah, I'm glad that you talked about it on the show and that you both experienced it.
Yeah, that book is so great. So before the pandemic, we were starting to see kind of rise from the ashes stories about independent bookstores. They survived. Amazon didn't kill them. People were buying, lo and behold, physical books. Ebook sales had plateaued, and suddenly COVID comes along. People don't want to go into stores. They don't want to touch books. I touch a surface. You touch a surface. What happens? Amazon hires hundreds of thousands of people and consolidates its position as the largest retailer in the world. Jeff Bezos makes $1 jillion. Do you have a sense from the FSG sales force of how bookstores are doing? And what about physical book sales as compared to ebooks?
Well, to start with the easy part first, there was definitely a surge for ebooks, as you'd expect at the beginning, but it was not overwhelming, and certainly physical books never went away. Physical book sales never went away, and the booksellers, it's been a hard year. I mean, I think for their part of the business more than any of us. There are some stores where they'll tell me that they've they maintained 80% or more of their business, which is amazing and incredible in so many ways. Also, it's a 20% drop in their business. A lot of stores obviously didn't maintain that. Certainly some stores have gone out of business, and then there are a lot of stores just figuring things out, like I said, surviving day to day. And I think we're going to have to see how that all works out. But by and large, I think that story you were hearing kept going. I mean, I think everyone saw like their local indie businesses really fighting to survive, and I think, and being creative and being aware of what they were good at and figuring out how to adapt that. I think the rise of e-commerce for those stores has been substantial and has forced them to figure out some things that now hopefully will be useful for them, but who knows what the future holds that way. Amazon obviously has probably become only more dominant, and that's one of the big storylines of publishing for the past few years. And that's it's not an unusual observation that so much of what happened during COVID was just an acceleration of trends that were already there. And I think I think this is no different, that there's been a lot of fight shown and a lot of creativity, a lot of innovation, and and a continuing story where we don't really know. We know it's been a really hard year. We know that a lot of stores have survived and done much better than I think they had anticipated when things just completely shut down. But where we end up in another year is still anyone's question. And the only real lesson is support your local store if you.
During online readings held by, people would hold virtual events, and those would be sponsored by bookstores. And, I moderated a couple of those, and Whitney may have done the same. We did events where they were sponsored by bookstores. Tom Frank was on the show, and that was sponsored by the library, by a bookstore. And then you would see people put links in the chat, this is the code, get the book 20% off tonight. And in some ways, Zoom is so precise. There's like 77 participants. Oh, in 2 minutes, it went down to 73. Oh my God, it went up to 82. I can't see any of them. I'm talking into a void. But a statistic that is not available to us, is like how many books are sold during an online event. And I had started off kind of assuming that it would be maybe on par or maybe even better because, for some people clicking is easier. And then I started to hear like trickles from my friends that it was not going that well, the online events. And then I thought about my own, I have all sorts of kind of ergonomic stuff that with the pandemic has gotten worse. I've got severe dry eye. Like I'm now much less likely to go to a Zoom reading. But if I think, oh, I would have gone in person, I'd like actually make sure to go and buy the book. What is your feeling about how those events move books or don't?
Well, yeah, it feels like there's sort of two separate things that we're talking about there, but they have not been, it's nothing like a sort of everyone who shows up buys a book by any means. And I would say probably they're not quite as efficient as in-person bookstore events. But in-person bookstore events also were not, anything like 100% efficient in terms of who showed up versus who bought books. And the trade-off, of course, is that you can reach so many more people from so many more different places in a Zoom event. So I think they had been a really key part and a really successful part at the beginning of the COVID response. There is definitely Zoom fatigue at this point. I think as you're saying, like you can see so much about how many people show up and how long they last and what ends up happening. And people are definitely tired in so many different ways. And so yeah, I think we have certainly been changing our strategies in terms of how many events we have people doing. And when we have them, we've recently been trying to get groups of bookstores to sponsor one event that are then sort of held in, one virtual auditorium. And, that obviously complicates the messaging on buying, but for right now, it seems like the most effective way. And so I would say it started out with more enthusiasm, but also people just not knowing what they were doing. And we've learned a lot more about how to make them work. But now we're also at a point where as you're saying, there's a sense of, of exhaustion. And so I think we're, as with, as you were saying earlier about, with book tours, we're sort of trying to practice what we've learned from the past year, and that's ever evolving, and trying to figure out what do we do about the fatigue, and trying to make sort of fewer, bigger, better events, and as you see in the comments, like really working on selling books as much as we can.
All right. So speaking of, we're trying not to wear you out. We are right here at the end. We've just got a couple more questions that I wanted to ask. And one of them that I'm genuinely curious about is like, and I don't know what sense you get of this. Maybe you get a sense of this from looking at book sales or what books took off. We were just talking about the surprise of Maria Devana Headley, but did people change what they wanted to read about during the pandemic? Were there certain titles of yours, I guess there is, that we have already mentioned, a title of yours that took off in an unexpected or surprising way? And I also wondered, like, were certain genres more popular, like fiction? Did fiction take off, or was nonfiction more popular? Did people buy more poetry? I mean, people were shut in. There is a benefit to a certain extent in the book world of the fact that people would have theoretically had more time to read.
Mm-hmm. I think that's true. I think people did have more time to read. I think people probably were reading more and are reading more, have been reading more. A lot of where we saw our sales were not in the front list. I mean, where we saw the sales really increase, but in the backlist. And the Beowulf example maybe connected to that people were looking for something, to my mind, like a mix of something new but also familiar. Like there was a bit of a baseline that like you knew you were going to get something. And so yes, I think people were reading more. Obviously, it was harder to make the space around each publication to really like give everything the level of, to drive the conversation around a book was just much harder. There were certain books, you mentioned Kavai's book, Sharks in the Time of Saviors, where I felt like that came out right as the world shut down. It was March 2020, and it was a book that it did have the book tour, and it was the first author I got to send to Hawaii on a book tour, and that all got cut off immediately.
That book is great, and I said Kauai, and he did tell me to say Kavai, and I'm going to just say to Kavai now. I'm sorry I messed that up earlier.
I wasn't intending to correct you, but
no, you said it the right way. I'm correcting myself. That's fine. He's your guy.
And so anyway, so I mean, I felt like that book we managed to publish effectively. Fiction versus nonfiction. I think a certain kind of nonfiction was really hard. A kind of thoughtful nonfiction about issues that we had all anticipated being really urgent. I think people felt like it was time where we could drive a conversation about climate change, about immigration. I mean, some topics that were really, really front of mind in January, February 2020. That there was a different kind of crisis where we were all just surviving, and so so I think there were definitely some challenges there. But I don't know. But I don't think there were a specific. I don't think there was a specific kind of book people were looking for. But I think the kind of conversations we could start were different, and were harder to start. Occasionally we could get them started, but yeah, it's definitely a challenge.
So as a last question, as sort of fan service for our listeners, many of whom are writers busily sending out pitch letters and trying to sell work, Now that the pandemic is over, do you or do you not want to read book proposals about it?
Um, no, not yet.
Oh, I'm closing the file on my computer right now, Sean.
I mean, one of the stranger experiences for me during the pandemic was that I had signed up this book about quarantine years ago. And one of my last meetings, professional meetings, was with the authors. I think it was in February, and they like you had this sense that something was coming and were feeling very urgent about their book. And so editing this book about quarantine during quarantine was one of the more like meta professional experiences that I've ever had. And I certainly feel like it has an incredibly timely value to it. And, and I do believe that that people want to understand what we've just been through. But, in terms of like a grand synthesis of what's happened to us during COVID, I can't believe we're ready for that. That anyone's ready to have that perspective. I think it took us a while with something like 9/11 to be ready to share that experience. So I think it's going to be there in everything we're doing in the near future. But, in terms of people's pandemic diaries, I may be missing out, but no, I'm not ready for that yet.
Sean, hey, thank you so much for joining us. I want to point out, I want to say good luck to your Lakers. You are the publisher also of The Mamba Mentality, Kobe Bryant's book. They're playing right now, so it means that we are deeply grateful that you've taken some game time out to spend some time with our audience. Good luck to them. Listeners, we encourage you to check out all the offerings at MCD. I put MSG because I was thinking of Madison Square Garden. MCDFG at Farrar and at Farrar, Straus and Giroux in general. They publish really great writers, no matter what you think of me. And I can't imagine a better group of people to work with and support. We'll put links to Electric Eel and the MCDFSG website and social media accounts in the show notes.
Thank you guys so much. This was great. And yes, I'm missing some basketball, but entirely worth it. So thank you.
Sean, thanks so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure to meet you after hearing so much.